Darkcast Network. Out of the shadows come the best indie podcasts.
Grab your marshmallows and sleeping bags for the Burnt Marshmallows podcast, where cozy mysteries come alive around the crackling campfire. Picture yourself wrapped in a warm blanket, sipping hot cocoa as we share spooky tales that will whisk you away to a world of mystery, ghosts, and perhaps even an occasional monster. Crime-solving spirits, urban legends, Bigfoot, we've got it all. Join Burnt Marshmallows every Tuesday, wherever you listen to podcasts for cozy mysteries.
Hey everyone, welcome to True Crime California. I'm your host, Cindy, and I'm glad you're here. Hey everybody, welcome back to True Crime California. This is part 2 of Richard Chase, the Vampire of Sacramento. I have to apologize, you guys. I completely failed to put that part 1 was a part 1. So I'm sure a ton of people listened to it thinking they're going to get the whole story. And then when I stopped, we're like, what the hell? Where's the rest of the story? It was like a rough couple of weeks, but we're back in the swing of things. I'm going to update that to say part 1. This will be part 2. And I apologize to anybody whose heart was broken when they realized they were going to have to wait another week to finish this tale. Anyway, I want to thank a few people who have been emailing case suggestions, letting me know they're enjoying the show. You guys rule. Thank you so much for that. I'm definitely going to take some of these suggestions. Some of them were the ones that I wanted to do soon anyway, so it feels like a sign. So the next few cases will probably be ones that were sent in by listeners, which is always exciting to see that people are listening and want to hear more. So thank you everyone for that. I appreciate you, and I'm really excited to cover some more cases that I know everybody wants to hear. But for now, let's get into part 2. I do want to tell you guys that I am surrounded by animals. I have my 2 dogs next to me, and my cat is on my lap cleaning himself. So if you hear any little animal noises, it's because I live in a zoo. Anyway, so this is such a horrific tale. I honestly think part of why it took me so long to put these out was because as I researched this, I've been doing a lot of heavy hitters to start this series, and I'm happy to do it. And like true crime is true crime, but like it wears on you. And I really, really hate this case on so many levels. So I'll be happy when it's over, but I'm happy that I did it. I think it's a really interesting case to cover. Brings up a lot of weird, and interesting questions about mental health, which we will definitely discuss as we get to the end of this case. But for now, let's get back into it. So I believe we were at the end of 1977. Actually, I keep confusing the months, but so we left off with Richard having killed his first victim, 51-year-old Ambrose Griffin, who was unloading groceries from his car with his wife in Sacramento when he was shot and killed. Richard did basically a drive-by. He was in a car, drove by, shot this man. He also, after this, so that was in December 1977. And then rolling into 1978, he attempted to kill a random woman who was doing dishes in her house, but shot the bullet through the bun. Like her hair was in a bun and it shot through this bun. It was that close to killing her. He tried to enter the home of another woman, but walked away because he didn't find any open doors or windows. And that was the woman that actually ended up staring him down like face to face through her sliding glass door. So super terrifying. And he successfully entered and ransacked the home of a young couple and also went to the bathroom in their baby's room and actually took a shit in their baby's crib, which is fucking insane. As I mentioned last time, I think this was January 23rd, 1978. And from here on out, Richard continued this totally whacked out spree. So this was actually all in the same day. I believe the same day he entered a home and tried to set it on fire, later claiming whoever lived there was spying on him. So one of his weird, like, paranoid fantasies. He actually definitely also on January 23rd ran into a woman he knew from school, so from high school. Now, he saw her at a grocery store and approached her in an aisle. Now, at first, the woman, whose name was Nancy, had no clue who he was. As you may remember, Richard had been clean cut and relatively normal, at least outwardly, during his high school years. And at this point, he's dirty. He has long, oily hair. He looks homeless. He's wearing like a blood spattered parka, which we'll talk about. He was actually wearing this because his father got it for him for Christmas. And he basically just like put it on his body and didn't take it off because he didn't shower. He didn't change his clothes. So, it'd only been worn for about a month straight. So it was much cleaner than the rest of him. And it could still be seen that it was bright orange, which is very memorable. But still dirty and disgusting. So anyway, at first, Nancy had no clue who this transient man was. But then Richard said something to her that was very specific. Nancy's boyfriend in high school, a boy named Kurt, had died in a motorcycle accident while they were in high school, which Richard obviously would have remembered because he went to school with them. The only thing that Richard said to this woman in the grocery store, or the first thing I guess he said to her, was, "Were you on the motorcycle when Kurt died?" It was at this point that the woman looked more closely at Richard, still couldn't figure out who he was, and then said, "Who are you?" He told her he was Rick Chase, and she was shocked because obviously, like I said, very, very different look to him nowadays. He then started kind of following her around the store and asking her for a ride, saying, "Oh, I don't have my car. Can you give me a ride?" She kept telling him, "No, I can't do that." And he continued to sort of follow her around and even followed her all the way out to her car. Nancy was so scared that she jumped into her car and locked him out. Like he was trying to open the handle of her door to get in, even though she told him over and over, "I can't give you a ride." So she locked the door and sped away. And this is important later. It comes back, but it's also just like a really freaky interaction that shows kind of how out of it and scary he was at this time. Even just despite like the things we know that he was doing, he just presented as a really whacked out, scary fucking dude. That same day, also January 23rd, 1978, so this is a big day for Richard, he again escalated his crimes. So, this is just crazy, crazy fucking day. Now, around midday, he again went out walking in the area near his apartment, just sort of meandering around. He walked through people's yards, onto their porches. He was trying doors and windows, and he was completely unbothered by the people who saw him doing this, which there were some. The worst thing about that is that nobody called the police. Many people were weirded out, but they didn't think that he was dangerous. So there were reports of like later on, like neighbors being like, "Oh yeah, we saw him. We were talking to our neighbor about it. We thought it was really weird, but we didn't do anything," which really sucks. So anyway, he makes his way to 2360 Tioga Way in Sacramento. And this is the home of 22-year-old Teresa Wallen and her husband. Now, Teresa was pregnant at the time and had just returned home from the grocery store where she had cashed a $10 check. And yes, this was the same grocery store where he had just accosted Nancy. So if we want to talk about whether or not this was planned, that gives us a little bit of a clue, and that will kind of come up later. Now, very unfortunately, Teresa's door was unlocked, so when Richard tried it, he was able to go right inside. And he did, in the middle of the day, in the middle of a big, busy city. When Richard entered, Teresa was walking from her kitchen to the front door with a bag of trash in her hands. She was going out through the front, and she had done so had she done so even 10 seconds earlier, she probably would have been able to stop Richard from entering her home. But very unfortunately, that is not what happened. When Teresa saw Richard, she dropped the bag of trash, probably because Richard had already pulled his gun from his holster and was aiming it at Teresa. With no hesitation, he fired the gun. The first shot went through Teresa's hand, traveled up her arm, and exited her elbow, then grazed her neck. So that's horrifying. It went through inside of her hand, came out, and hit her again. Absolutely terrible. The next bullet hit her in the jaw, shattering her jaw and knocking her to the ground. Teresa, always smiling and happy, had a look of terror on her face at this moment that was still there when detectives found her, and that haunted them for many years. While Teresa was on the ground, seriously wounded but not yet dead, Richard approached her, put the gun 6 inches from her head, and fired into her temple. And this killed Teresa instantly. Richard then dragged Teresa's body from the living room to a bedroom, then went to the kitchen to find a knife. This is a trigger warning moment. There will be another one, but this is the first one of this episode. Richard then raped her dead body while stabbing her in the stomach with the knife that he took from the kitchen. He also cut off one of her nipples and cut her open from her sternum to her hips, pulling out her intestines, cutting out both of her kidneys and placing them in different places in her body, and also cutting out her spleen. He found a yogurt cup in her trash bag and used it to drink her blood as it spilled out of her body, which is disgusting on many, many levels. As his final fuck you to this completely random, poor young woman, he went into her yard and found dog feces from her pet German Shepherd and shoved it down her throat before leaving the house. Her husband came home hours later after work and found her body, which I cannot imagine what that's like. He called the police, and he also called Teresa's parents, who somehow ended up seeing her body. I don't know how that happened, but they did. When police were called to the scene when they got there, as I said, they were horrified, but they also took immediate action. They started interviewing neighbors, and many came forward with that same story of a strange, disheveled man walking around the area that day. From these descriptions, people were able to create a sketch, police were, and also noted his clothing, including the orange parka, which is a pretty, that stands out, right? Sadly, all of this took several days to put together. Even though they were working quickly, these things take time. And meanwhile, Richard would continue his reign of terror on the people of Sacramento. 4 days later, on January 27th, Richard would kill again. But before he did that, he called his mother to talk about little green men, among totally unhinged things, just all sorts of weird shit. He also walked around the area knocking on doors and asking for used newspapers, which is super weird. And had anybody opened the door for him, perhaps he would have struck sooner. Now, many people came forward with this story, as well as a description of the man that matched the one who murdered Teresa Wallin. Now, unfortunately, I thought I should mention this because it's just kind of shows the type of person he was and the things he was doing. On January 25th, so 2 days before his next murder, he bought 2 Labrador puppies listed for sale in the newspaper. The couple who sold him the puppies later told police he was really weird and that they found it strange that he didn't care about the sex or condition of the dogs. But they still sold them to him. Fucking red flag, guys. The same couple actually found one of their other puppies dead in their backyard after selling Richard the dogs, having been shot to death and then split open with a knife. So, I think we all know what happened. In any case, on to the next human murders. And as bad as the last murder was, this one is far, far worse in my mind. On January 27th, 1978, Richard went out walking and eventually entered the unlocked home of Evelyn Moroth, a 38-year-old single mother to a 6-year-old boy named Jason. Now, on this day, Evelyn was also babysitting her sister's 20-month-old son that day. His name was, I think, Daniel, actually. She also had a friend over helping out, and his name was Dan Meredith, and he went by Danny. Now, these two were not romantically involved, and Evelyn actually had a boyfriend, but they were good friends, and Danny helped her out a lot, and he cared about her family a lot. Now, that morning, her good friend and neighbor from across the street, I think her name is Neone, had asked if Evelyn and Jason wanted to go to the snow in the nearby mountains. It doesn't snow very often up there, really. I I lived in the Sacramento area for like years and years, and I think I saw snow once. So it was a big deal, to you either have to drive to see it or if it was nearby. But anyway, this neighbor was like, hey, do you guys want to go? Evelyn said, I can't, I'm babysitting, but if you can take Jason, that would be great. And Neone agreed. And Evelyn said, I'll have him over just after 10 o'clock. I'm going to go rent him some snowshoes. Now, around 11 a.m., Neone was like, where's Jason? So she sent her daughter, who was also 6, over to the house to see where they were because they were super, super late. When nobody answered, her daughter Tracy came back home, and a few minutes later, Neone herself went to see what was going on. When she knocked on the door again, nobody answered. She told another friend and neighbor, also named Nancy, who then went inside Evelyn's house from the back door and found a man's body on the floor covered in blood. Nancy began screaming, then shouted, then ran from the home saying that someone was in there, but that something was terribly wrong. The police were called and they came to an absolutely horrific scene. Just inside the front door, Danny Meredith's body was lying on the floor covered in blood. He had been shot in the head and was later determined to have been dead for a few hours. Detectives then saw blood in a nearby bathroom and went in to find a tub full of bloody water. They then went into the main bedroom where they found Evelyn's body. Evelyn had also been shot, but also horrifically mutilated, much in the way Teresa Wallen was. Evelyn was cut from her sternum to her hips and had her organs removed, also had them moved, and her intestines pulled out of her body. She had also been raped post-mortem and had also been stabbed in the anus repeatedly. Now, these stabbings cut open her uterus from the other side. They were so violent and so hard that he actually cut almost all the way up through her body. One of her eyes was also horribly damaged as it had been, someone had attempted to cut it out, but failed. We know who that someone is. Her son, 6-year-old Jason Moroth, was found in another room and had also been shot to death. As for her 20-month-old nephew, David, when police entered the home, they found that he was missing. A huge manhunt began, despite police believing he was almost certainly already dead. Now, obviously, this was Richard who committed these crimes, and after he had killed Danny, Evelyn, and Jason, he fled in Danny's red station wagon, which police then started looking for. And I'm going to jump ahead in the story now to tell you that this baby, David, was in fact dead and had most likely been killed while in his crib by being shot in the head, then taken from his home by Richard after he fled when Jason's friend Tracy came to get him to go to the snow. So it was thought later that Richard had been interrupted and so just took the body almost like in a panic. Richard took the boy to his home, where he stabbed him in the anus, just as he had done to Evelyn, and also cut a hole in the back of his head to more easily drink his blood. So this is fucking awful. This boy's body was found after Richard was arrested. He was found in a box in a garbage bin in March. So it took almost 2 months to find him, but at least it was found, which I'm happy that his family had that closure. Now, as for what happened at the house, it is thought that Evelyn may have been taking a bath when Richard entered the home, which is how the tub came to be filled with bloody water. She was definitely dragged into her room after being killed and was found to be wet. So it's not clear if Richard placed her in the tub or took her from it. Maybe he even bathed in the bloody tub himself. It is thought that Danny came back into the home while Richard was murdering Evelyn and Jason and was shot as he was kind of walking into the house from the back door. So for Danny, it was like a sneak attack by Richard. I think they kind of surprised each other. And then obviously Jason and David were just shot. They're children. They couldn't defend themselves. That's fucking horrific. So now we have these two horrific murders nearly back to back. obviously perpetrated by the same person, and police are desperate for answers. They even had a few suspects they brought in for questioning the same day as the murders, but they were ultimately released. Within a couple of days, they had Robert Ressler from the FBI help them with a profile, which is crazy because this case moved so quickly. It seemed there wouldn't have been time for this, but there was. And he put together a pretty accurate description, like white man, mid-20s, probably doesn't drive, or if he does, wasn't driving at this point, recently out of a mental hospital, suffering from mental problems. Like, he was pretty on. It was pretty accurate, which is wild. Now, 5 days after the first murder, the woman from the grocery store, Nancy, told her father-in-law about her run-in with Richard, and he called police, giving them the name Richard Chase. Police asked why it took them so long to report the crime, and their answer was that the woman didn't realize what was going on until she saw the sketch of the suspect, at which point she immediately told someone. From here, police began looking into Richard's past, and I mean, it's pretty crazy what they found, of course, including the time Richard was found covered in cow's blood in a field. Pretty gnarly and weird. They also looked up some of his history of purchases and found that he had been buying bullets. I don't know that they knew that he had guns, but they could sort of track that he was buying bullets. Obviously, you're buying bullets probably because you have a gun. So they then go to his apartment building because they decide they're going to arrest him. They're not even going to interview him. They've got enough on him. They're just going to go get him. So they go to the apartments, they talk to the manager, let the manager know what's going on, which is great, and they go up and they knock on Richard's door. Now, Richard refused to answer, even though he was home and police could hear him in the apartment. So police stood outside for quite a while Richard refused to come out or even answer them. At one point, they called his home phone and he answered, and then when he realized who it was, he hung up, which is so weird that he would answer in that moment. But again, there's so much weirdness about this case, including the way that police finally got him was that they pretended to leave, making a big deal about walking down the stairs and walking away. And this apparently fooled Richard, who then came out of his apartment with a big bag of trash in his hands, or a box, I think, of trash. He immediately saw the police, who ordered him to stop, but I bet you can guess what he did instead. He ran away, or tried to, but police were able to stop him and arrest him on sight. Now, inside the bag, I think, was a bunch of torn up paper, which is super random. But more importantly, what they found in Richard's back pocket was a light brown wallet. And in this wallet was Danny Meredith's ID card, as well as, his bank account, his bank card, library card, all his identifying stuff. So this was his wallet, and it was on Richard when they arrested him. Of course, police take Richard down to the station, and after being taken in for questioning, he refused to admit any wrongdoing in terms of the murders, but he did admit to killing many dogs. Now, he also killed cats and rabbits, but in this moment, he was just admitting to the dogs because police had found newspapers with ads for dogs for sale circled. So they were they knew he was still on that shit. Now, also in his apartment, I mean, it was just a fucking disgusting scene. It was putrid smelling. Everything was covered in blood. His couch, his floor, his refrigerator, his countertops, his clothing. Everything was just covered in blood spatter and drips. I mean, what the hell? Absolutely disgusting. And there were bullet holes in the walls and in the ceiling because Richard had been shooting his gun in some sort of paranoid fit. Anyway, Richard continued to refuse to cooperate with police, but they had enough evidence without his help, including bullets that matched his gun, at both crime scenes. They also had his footprints from Evelyn Maroth's home, and he was fucking covered in blood head to toe when he was arrested. Now, there was a lot of back and forth here, but essentially, Richard went to trial for the murders in 1979, and the main focus of the trial was not whether or not he did it. They had a pretty open and shut case. They had the gun evidence, they had eyewitness testimony, they had his hair and fingerprints and shoe prints. I don't think they had like blood DNA in the same way, but they could do blood typing to see that it all kind of aligned. They had the wallet. It was a slam dunk case in terms of like, yes, he did this, but the main focus was whether or not he was sane at the time of the murders. Now, his defense, of course, said that he was not, and that he wasn't able to premeditate these killings because he was too mentally ill. They pointed to his post-arrest interviews, during which time he claimed to be a persecuted Jew with Nazis out to get him. He also continued on with his stuff about being dead, about his blood not working, having to drink animal blood to replace his blood. He has blood poisoning, just all that same shit. Also, while he was being held, he said that the food at the jail was being poisoned, going as far as having his defense team test the food, which of course came back negative. While there was no argument, really, that he was very mentally ill, the prosecution argued that he was still very much in control of his actions at the time of the killings, citing his refusal to open the door for the police, his washing of his hands before leaving certain crime scenes, which apparently he did, his stalking of women, including Teresa Wallin, which showed there was premeditation in terms of finding victims, and their biggest smoking gun was Richard Chase himself confessing his crimes to a fellow inmate, including giving details about how he chose his victims, which proved premeditation. Richard straight up admitted to this inmate that he had followed Teresa Wallin home before killing her, which is very much first-degree murder. And this inmate agreed to testify for nothing in return. So he wasn't given a reduced sentence or any sort of favor. He just testified because this is what he heard and he wanted him to be held accountable, I guess. Now, Richard's family stood by him during this trial, or at least his mother did, and to kind of show what kind of people his parents were, or at least his mother was, at one point during the trial, his mother confronted Teresa Wallin's husband and told him that it was their dog's fault for not protecting her from Richard, because apparently the dog was in the home and didn't keep Richard from killing her. So Richard's mother said it was the dog's fault that she died and not her son's fault. What a fucking asshole. Anyway, in May of 1979, after just a few weeks of trial, Richard was found guilty on all 6 counts of murder and was sentenced to the gas chamber. Uh-oh, there's a car alarm going off. And to clarify, when I say 6 counts, I'm talking about Teresa Wallin, Evelyn Maroth, Jason Maroth, Danny Meredith, David Ferreira, her nephew, and Teresa Wallin's unborn child. Richard was found guilty and was sentenced to the gas chamber. Once in prison, Chase continued to be a big problem, acting in very psychotic ways, causing trouble, and actually scaring other prisoners who kept away from him or tried to convince him to kill himself because they both hated and feared him. For a time, he was sent to a mental hospital, but returned to prison in 1980 after being deemed ready for reintegration with the general prison population, which sounds like a load of horse shit to me, but whatever. That being said, to prove my point, he kept talking about the food being poisoned, there being UFOs, and all sorts of other crazy shit. Kind of a cool part of this case, or an interesting part, I should say, is that the FBI took a really strong interest in Richard due to his being a perfect example of what is now called a, quote, disorganized killer. This meant, like, being a disorganized killer means you have no process. So he had no process to his killings, was completely random in his choice of victims, was socially withdrawn, and basically just had no rhyme or reason to what he was doing, just like there was no rhyme or reason to most of his life. Now, there are organized killers and disorganized killers. An organized killer would be somebody like Israel Keyes. If you don't know who he is, look him up. He's probably the most interesting serial killer in my opinion. I can't really cover him because he wasn't California based. But on Twisted Listers, I did like a Patreon episode that I think I posted on our regular podcast, you could hear about it. I did it a long time ago, but it's still interesting. I think I covered a lot. But anyway, he's a great example of like an organized killer. He plans everything well in advance. He's got his tools. He's got his like processes. It's also called like another factor. I don't know if they're the same thing, but it's like a process killer. So a killer that has a particular way that they kill because they enjoy the kill. With Richard Chase, he was a product killer and he was a disorganized killer. So he wasn't killing for the sake of killing. He was killing for the blood. He was killing for what he got from the dead body. And he was also extraordinarily disorganized in that process, obviously. So to kind of figure out more about Richard Chase and the way that he worked, Robert Ressler interviewed him a bunch of times between 1979 and 1980. And obviously they weren't doing this just to find out more about Richard. Like, they wanted to find out more about killers like him. So it's really interesting that he was so integral to the FBI's overall understanding of different types of serial killers, or different types of killers in general. Now, unfortunately, Ressler had very little time with Chase, as Richard died at the end of 1980. On December 26th, in fact, 1980, around 11 a.m., Richard Chase was found unresponsive in his jail cell. Now, he had intentionally overdosed on Sinequin, a drug he was prescribed for his hallucinations and depression. He had pretended to take this pill every day for over a month, instead saving and hiding them until he had enough to overload his system, which is exactly what he did. So this is another instance of him being mentally ill enough to want to do something like kill himself, and mentally cognizant enough to plan and execute his own death. So a very interesting sort of look into how somebody can be very, very mentally ill, very tormented and tortured, and still with it enough mentally to know what they're doing and to do horrible things. So it's interesting to have sympathy for him on the level that he was mentally ill, he was tormented, he was never given the help that he needed, but also hold him accountable for the horrific things that he did as a murderer. Just absolutely fucking terrible, the things that he did. And the only thing that I take solace in, which really isn't much of anything at all, is that he did not mutilate and torture these people while they were alive, which is a very small favor. But in the end, at least these people died quickly. They were not tortured. They were not, assaulted sexually or otherwise while they were alive. But it's definitely not like a silver lining by any means. It's definitely not like a happy ending to the story. It's just an at least moment. Well, at least it wasn't the most horrifying thing I've ever heard. It was close, but at least it wasn't. I don't know what I'm trying to say here. This is a fucked up fucking tale. And honestly, I thought these two parts were going to be much longer. I think now that I'm looking at it, I probably could have done this in one episode, and I apologize that I did not. I think maybe mentally I needed the break. But I apologize for the kind of shorter episodes these last 2 weeks. We'll be getting back to it full force next week with something exciting and interesting. I think I'm going to do an unsolved mystery case. But yeah, thanks everybody for listening. Please like, rate, review, tell your friends and family, support local small podcasts. I don't know if I'm local to many of you. It looks like a lot of my listeners are in like other countries. So support small podcasts, indie podcasts. Keep us going, guys. Thanks everybody. I'll be back again next week. And until then, stay safe.